Hey Siri, set an appointment for 3:30 p.m. Tuesday.
Reminder set for 3:30.
Hey Siri, remind me to pick up strawberries and blueberries for my smoothie.
Okay.
Hey Siri, why do I need God if I'm a good person?
Okay. Checking WebMD for why do I have a huge rash on my...
Today, I brought actually a few groceries to get us thinking about our topic here. These are just ordinary things that pretty much any of us would have probably either in our pantry or certainly would go to the store and grab off the shelf and throw in our cart without a whole lot of thought. And they're most likely things you'd pop open either with a can opener or tear open the box, throw in the boiling water in the case of the macaroni, or spread on your sandwich in the case of the peanut butter or whatever else, and just enjoy without giving any thought whatsoever to whether or not these foods are safe. And we sort of assume that because they're in the store that someone's been keeping an eye on this, that someone somewhere is making sure that the things that we're eating don't contain things that could be harmful to us. And of course, the primary organization that's responsible for this is the FDA. It's the Food and Drug Administration. It's their job to make sure that there aren't too many things in our food that might not be good for us. In fact, I was doing a little sort of browsing the FDA website this last week, and I came across a publication called the FDA Defect Levels Handbook. And on this publication, they painstakingly walk through different sorts of foods and the standards that are required in order for these foods to be safe to sell. The quote says this, it says, they're tracking levels of natural and unavoidable defects in foods that present no health hazards for humans, or so they claim. And so they go into these details about what level of outside matter is okay to have included in your food. And I'll just warn you right now, some of these are very disturbing, all right? So for instance, according to the FDA, this box here of elbow macaroni, this 16-ounce box of macaroni noodles, it can contain up to 6 rodent hairs per package and still be sellable. 10 rodent hairs, they'll pull it off the shelf. Up to 9, bon appetit. All right? Or this, peanut butter, which I may never eat again, actually. According to the FDA, for this to be considered good, this 40-ounce jar of peanut butter cannot contain not only more than 10 rodent hairs, it cannot contain more than 340 insect fragments, little parts of bugs. There can't be more than 340 of them in this jar. 341, not safe for you. 339, spread it on your toast, right? Now, you knew peanut butter was high in protein. You just didn't know how they got it in there, did you? But now you do. Or this. This is a box of cornmeal. I lived in the South for a while, in East Tennessee, and I'll just tell you, if you've been to the South, you know how delicious a good bowl of grits or a cornbread with melted butter on top. Ooh, mama, all right? Until you hear this. This box of cornmeal, it's a 40-ounce box. It is considered okay if it has fewer than 21 fragments of rodent excreta. Do you know what rodent excreta is? It's rat poop, all right? That's what that is. And up to 21 fragments it, A-okay, all right? And you can enjoy it in your grits or whatever else might be in it. But surely fruit is better, right? I mean, this doesn't have sort of that sort of stuff. Hopefully there's no rodent excreta in here. At least there shouldn't be. But according to the FDA, in this can of crushed pineapple from a name brand company, this item is good if it has a mold count of no more than 20%. That means 1 in 5 pieces of pineapple in a sample can have mold and it still be safe by the definition of the government for you to eat. And I'll just tell you up front, I couldn't even bring myself to read the section on hot dogs, all right? And I'm certainly not going to put them on you today. You just don't need that. Life is hard enough, all right? But all of this sort of raises a question, at least when it comes to our food. What is good? Or at least, what is good enough? Like, what level of impurity are you okay with? Are you okay with a little rodent excreta in your cornmeal, right? How much is too much? And who gets to decide? What is good? This is an important question when it comes to our food, one that we don't even think about all that much, but it's an even more important question when it comes to a bigger subject, that of our lives. What is good? It's the question we're going to be talking about today. Why do I need God if I'm a good person? You've heard people say this. Maybe you say this yourself. Why can't I just do my best? Why can't I try not to hurt people, to generally be a nice person? And yeah, I know from time to time I'll make mistakes, but isn't it okay if I just try to learn from those mistakes and maybe try to make up for them by doing something good? I mean, isn't that good enough? And this is a widely held belief. Survey after survey after survey shows that even people who call themselves Christians, they stand here. They really says it's not as important what you really believe. What ultimately matters is whether or not you're a good person. That's what God cares about. Which all sounds very good. Of course, God would want people to be good. This even sounds logical at first, but it raises some really big questions that are actually far more complicated to try to answer. The biggest of which, as we've already said with this food, what is good? Like, what is good enough? It's not all that different from these FDA regulations. Who is it that gets to decide what good is? Is it these individual companies? Do we leave it up to the folks at Dole or at Jif to decide how much rodent excreta can be included? Are you comfortable with the decision that the government makes because they decide what's okay? Or should every person just be left to themselves to kind of define their own standards? Now, some people would say, Wolfgang, you're making too big a deal of this. Everybody knows, no matter what it is that we believe, everybody sort of shares around the world a general sense of what's morally right and wrong. I mean, that's pretty much across the board, which may on the surface seem true, but when you slow down and think about it, it's not actually as cut and dry as you think. Just yesterday, I ran across an article, literally just published yesterday in the New York Times. It's describing a children's book, keep in mind a book written for children, that was published in 2016 by a company based in India. And this book is called Great Leaders, and it profiles 11 different leaders from human history. And the cover has some faces you probably would expect, people like Mahatma Gandhi, people like Nelson Mandela, but there is one very familiar but unexpected face on the cover included with these others. It's Adolf Hitler. And the description of this book, the reason these leaders are being celebrated is because, according to the book, they devoted their lives, quote, devoted their lives for the betterment of their country and their people. Well, some people heard about this, and they contacted that publisher to protest, and the publisher responded. They said the book was actually published all the way back in 2016. It's been out for almost 2 years, and no one has raised any objections to it prior to this. They explained, quote, from their response, his leadership skills and speeches influenced masses. We're not talking about his way of conduct or his views, but simply portraying how powerful he was as a leader. Now, you may lift him up as an example of great leadership. I don't so much. And think about this. We live in a world where there are a significant number of people who believe it is good to strap explosives to your body, walk into a busy market or bus, and detonate that bomb, killing yourself and as many around you as you can. In fact, that's not only good, that's a higher level of good. Now you say, that's an extreme case. Sure it is. And most of us in this room would agree that is not good. But not everyone sees it the same way we do. You see, this isn't as cut and dry as you first think. So what is good? What is good enough? And who gets to decide? Well, this is actually a question that the Bible talks about. One of the authors of the New Testament, an early leader in the Christian movement, a guy named James. He was writing a letter to try to encourage some of these young believers who are figuring out what it means to live in this life. He actually begins to address this specific question right in the middle of his letter in James chapter 2, verses 10 to 13. If you have a Bible, you can turn there. We'll also show it on the screens. But here's what James writes when he's asking this similar question. What is the standard? Here's what he writes, chapter 2, verses 10 and following. He says, "Whoever keeps the whole law and yet stumbles at just one point is guilty of breaking all of it," he says. "For he who said, 'You shall not commit adultery,' also said, 'You shall not murder.' If you do not commit adultery, but do commit murder, you've become a lawbreaker." And then this challenge that we'll come back to in verse 12. "Speak and act as those who are going to be judged by the law that gives freedom, because judgment without mercy will be shown to anyone who has not been merciful. Mercy triumphs over judgment." Now, in the month of August, we're actually going to do an extended series studying through this book of James because there's so much good stuff in there. And so because you're here today, the third week of August, you can just skip, all right? Because that's when we'll come back to this passage and talk about it some more. But what is James saying here? He's saying, how many strikeouts does it take to ruin a perfect batting average? Just one. How many bad apples does it take to spoil a barrel? Well, I'm not personally very experienced in the world of apple barrels, but you know what the saying is. Just one. How many holes did it take to sink the Titanic? Over 1,500 lives were lost because of one hole. And based on measurements, you know how big that hole actually was, surface-wise? Only about 15 cubic feet. Smaller than the size of your refrigerator. That one hole was enough to take that boat and all of those lives to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. It only takes one. How many sermons does it take for a congregation to say to its teaching pastor, "When are you going back to India?" Well, probably just one, and I don't want this to be that talk, all right? So I'm going to do my best to kind of walk through this passage in such a way that we discover there's actually payoff in this text for every person in this room. Wherever you consider yourself spiritually, whatever it is you believe. Whether you're a total skeptic about all this or whether you're totally on board. James says, how many of God's laws must you break in order to earn the label of lawbreaker? And James says the answer is just one. You violate any of the teachings of the Bible, you earn the distinction of being, as it says in the text, a lawbreaker. And then he makes reference to some of the 10 Commandments, as if to say, how many of the 10 Commandments must you break before you have to admit that you are a commandment breaker? And again, the answer is just one. I mean, just think in your own life. You're probably familiar, or at least have heard of the idea of the 10 Commandments. Some might be more familiar than others. Just think in your own life. How many have you actually followed all of your life of the 10? Just by way of reminder. Number 1 is have no other gods before God. Number 2, don't carve any idols, no graven images, no carving little stone or wooden idols that you worship. Number 3, honor God's name. Don't use it profanely or casually. OMG. 4, honor the Sabbath. Now, some of these might seem a little specific, maybe very directly related to this specific religion, but then the commandments move into broader categories that I think most people across the board would agree are out of line for proper behavior. For instance, number 5, don't covet. Don't be jealous. Don't be envious. Don't scroll through Facebook looking at the pictures of your friend's vacation and thinking, I wish I had their life. Number 6, don't murder. Now, of course, Jesus expanded this. He said, hey, when this commandment says don't murder, it actually is even saying don't hate someone in your heart, because hating them in your heart is just as bad as murder. But let's not do too strict an interpretation. Let's just stick to killing people, all right? Number 7, don't commit adultery. And again, Jesus said, if you look someone lustfully, you fantasize about them or whatever, that is the same as committing adultery. But again, let's not get carried away in the interpretation. Let's keep it letter of the law here, just whether you've slept with someone other than your spouse. Number 8, don't steal. Number 9, don't lie. Number 10, honor your parents. Now let's just be honest. How many here have kept all 10 of those commandments? Do we have any 9s? Any 9s in the room? Any 9s? was sort of reviewing back through these and trying to do an honest inventory of myself. Best I can count, there are 4 I think I've never done. I've never carved an idol, I've never killed anybody, and the other 2 are none of your business. So if you break number 1 or 3 or 5 or 7 or 9 or 2 or 4 or 6 or 8, any combination thereof, let's not quibble over that, James says. The very fact that you couldn't keep all 10, just that simple list of 10, the very fact that you violated some of those core teachings puts you in the undeniable place where you have to admit, along with the rest of us, that you are a violator of these basic moral principles, the laws of God. Again, why is James so concerned about these questions? What's he driving at? I'll just cut to the chase. Quite simply, he's trying to get all his readers, all his listeners, you and I included, to pull our heads out of the sands of denial and admit freely that there is a streak of lawlessness in us. There's a streak of rebellion in us. There is a dark side to us that rears its ugly head from time to time. It happens, James says, in all of us. But maybe you say, okay, Wolfgang, I'll give you that. But I've made my mistakes, but I'm not as bad as many people I know. I mean, compared to these folks, I'm actually doing okay. And I try to minimize the mistakes I make. I try to keep them small. I can't say that I've ever done really anything super big. And I'll admit, I'll concede, some of us are pint-sized lawbreakers. Others of us are prolific lawbreakers. But it doesn't matter in the scheme of things. We're all lawbreakers. We all make moral mistakes. We tend to approach it, sort of grade ourselves on a curve, sort of compare ourselves to others. We think of a big scale, and at one end of that scale, you've got the really good people, right? The Mother Teresas of the world, the Billy Grahams of the world, the Gary Stabberts of the world. You may not know him. He's one of our pastors, one of the kindest, most gentle men you ever know. I'd put him pretty far over on that scale, even though he would object to it. But on the other end of the scale are those really nasty people. It's that section over there. You can look at them. Go ahead. They're over there, right? Aren't you happy you sat where you sat today, right? There's this scale, right? And where do we tend to put ourselves on that scale? Well, you think, sure. I'm not as good as some of those people down there. At least I'm not as bad as those people over there, right? So we tend to draw the line just next to ourselves over here, don't we? Not quite as bad as them, but I'm not even sure I want to be as good as them, right? But the problem is we're grading on the wrong scale. Because you see, friends, this is a pass-fail exam, and the only passing grade is 100%. Anything short on this test will not do. And nobody gets 100%. Where's the line? Because let's just be honest, you know how it works. We know the right thing to do, and we know the wrong thing to do, and sometimes we pick the wrong thing. We know the right thing to say, but it doesn't always come out. Sometimes the wrong thing comes out. We have a sense of what God would have us do in a particular situation, what the right thing would be. We do the opposite. I mean, what is that about? It's about this streak in us. It's a word you'll sometimes hear people use, this idea of being depraved, broken down deep. It's this sinister work of darkness that's dynamic in all of us. And James is pressing for us not only to admit this about ourselves, but to even go one step further, to actually accept full responsibility for what that behavior makes us in the eyes of a holy God. It makes us lawbreakers. There's no denying it. Now, whether that matters or not is another conversation, but there's no denying where we stand. Because truth be told, most of us don't want to own that kind of thing. We hate wearing these kinds of labels. I hate these kinds of labels. I look for ways to minimize it, to put euphemisms on it. In fact, even preparing for this message, I was trying to think of ways that I could say this in a softer, more gentle way. But here's the simple truth about us, friends. When you exaggerate a story, when you shade the truth just to make yourself look a little better, when you make a promise that you ultimately don't keep, you got to admit to yourself in that moment, I am a liar. Let's just call it what it is. Whenever you act in a self-centered way, you do some damage to a relationship. we admit to ourselves and to God in that moment, I have violated the law of love. I have trampled on one of the highest law in the kingdom of God, which is the law of love. When you borrow company supplies, stretch a company expense report, abuse any company benefit, say what you're doing, just say it. I'm stealing. I'm a thief. If you get drunk, just say, I'm a person who does drunkenness. Cheating, any kind, serious business. Sexual sin, serious business. Greed, serious business. Favoritism, discrimination, very serious business. Because we're all lawbreakers and we live in a law-breaking society. And sometimes we just forget just how abhorrent our lawlessness is to a holy God. We just compare ourselves with other people. We play hide and seek. We hide our own struggles, and we seek everybody else's out so we feel better, right? You know, honestly, when I go back to that list of 10, truthfully, there's not a single one of those commands I've followed all my life. Sure, I've never carved an idol, but I'll tell you, there have been lots of things I've worshiped other than God. Hatred spurred up in my heart, all kinds of things. Not one of those commands have I kept in my life. See, James says, some of you are spectacular sinners, and some of you are just kind of boring sinners. But that's not the point. The point is what Paul says over in Romans chapter 3, verse 10. There is no one righteous, not even one. Not you, not me. We're lawbreakers. So James says we got to be honest about that. Why do we need to be honest? Because when we see ourselves for who we really are as lawbreakers, and when we see God for who He really is, which is holy, which cannot be associated, will not tolerate any kind of impurity. My goodness, if the things in potential food products turn your stomach, it's nothing compared to the way this God responds to the darkness and evil in our world. When we see that, we become very aware that we've got an issue. We've got a challenge. We've got a problem. We need help. We need forgiveness. And most of all, in the context of today's specific passage, we need mercy. We need grace. Because you see there in verses 12 and 13, James not only reminds lawbreakers that in Christ they can find forgiveness and mercy that they so desperately need, but beyond that, forgiven lawbreakers should become massive distributors of mercy in every corner of their lives. The mercy they receive should change forever the manner in which they treat other people, instead of digging in their heels and demanding their way first. What makes biblical Christianity so remarkable is that guilty lawbreakers, who by right should pay dearly for their misdeeds, they can have all their moral and ethical crimes paid for by a third party, namely Jesus Christ. As a result of His death on the cross, this formal case against all of us lawbreakers can be dropped permanently in the heavenly courts. Case dismissed, legally liberated. How is this so? This is so because God makes an outrageous decision with regard to lawbreakers. Listen to this closely. God decided to inject mercy into the judicial equation by which we will be someday judged. This is an unheard of thing, friends. This does not happen anywhere else in society. Almost all the judicial systems of the world, they operate on a system of justice and retribution. You break a law, find that out. You break a law, you'll pay. You'll be punished. Let's say I'm charged with stealing a car. I could never go before a judge and say, I know I stole a car, Your Honor, but think of all the other cars I haven't stolen. And even after I stole it, I drove it under the speed limit. I even stopped for a pedestrian in the crosswalk. You'd be surprised to know I even let a guy in front of me in traffic. Doesn't that give me some kind of credit here? Doesn't that let me off the hook? Give that a try. Or my kids. Is this how it works at my house? My kids come to me and I say, and they say, I know I hit my sister. But Dad, I think you should let me off the hook because at least I didn't kill her. Or, think about it, Dad. Think of all those times I cleaned my room or I emptied the dishwasher. Doesn't that kind of build up the account enough so a couple of demerits are not that big a deal? I'll tell you, it does not work it that way in my house, okay? Does it work that way in yours? Here's the deal. You do what you shouldn't, you face the consequences. And depending on the kind of law you break, you might have to pay big time, you might be punished big time. School systems, military systems, corporate systems, they all operate on this same formula. Break the rules, you'll pay. You'll face punishment. You'll face consequences. But in this cosmic judicial system, God does an astonishing thing. He takes the crimes that we have committed, and then he arranges for his son, Jesus Christ, to stand in our place, to pay our fine, to bear our consequence, to receive our punishment. And then, in this amazing display of mercy, he lets guilty lawbreakers like me and like you go scot-free. Even the people over in that section. In fact, he goes even a step further. And he declares formally, this holy God says that that man, that woman, on the basis of Jesus Christ, embracing what he has done on their behalf, that person is no longer guilty. They are blameless. They are pure. See, this is the truth. This is the good news that has changed lives for hundreds and hundreds of years, friends. It's why this message has spread far and wide and transformed even the hardest hearts into generous, loving human beings. It's changed my life. I don't have to go through my life trying to make up for the bad things that I've done, trying to inch my way up the scale, trying to balance out some mysterious cosmic moral scales in the sky. Think about it. Those who are just trying to do more good than bad in their lives, who consider themselves good based on comparison, you never know where the balance point is. You never know if you're doing enough. You never know exactly what the scorecard reads. You never know what the expectations are. I mean, where's the balance point? See, the good news is I don't have to think about that. I don't have to spend my life in some frenzied attempt to make up for all these things I should not have done. And that's how the book of Titus sort of summarizes this little book at the back of the New Testament. It captures the message in this simple little sentence. It says, Jesus saved us not because of righteous things we had done, but because of his mercy. It's because of his mercy. I can gain a new kind of assurance because God has extended mercy to me. And the Bible says, if I acknowledge my lawlessness, my impurity, if I quit pretending, trying to cover up the darkness in my life, masking it behind the good things that might be in there as well, there is stuff hidden deep inside me that is stomach-turning, friends. Things I've seen, done, and said. I'd be horribly embarrassed if you ever knew. God says, you bring all that impurity to me, and I will do the unthinkable. I will offer you the opportunity to accept the payment that Jesus made on your behalf. I will set you free from the penalty of sin and declare you not guilty before a holy God. There's another pastor, a guy named Tim Keller. Some of you heard him. He served in New York for a number of years. He summarizes this whole message very elegantly in this sentence. He says, the gospel is this, the good news is this. We are more sinful and flawed in ourselves than we ever dared believe. The darkness is deeper than you even know, he says. Yet, at the very same time, we are more loved and accepted in Jesus Christ than we ever dared hope. Sure, the darkness is deeper than you even realize, but that love, it's even deeper, friends. Just tell you from my own life, there is nothing like mercy. There's nothing in the world like it. It's the best. And that day that I came to clarity on this, even though I'd sat in church for a long time, trying to make sure I was stacking the deck so that on the cosmic scales, the good outweighed the bad. On that day when I finally realized it wasn't that kind of a game, and I recognized the chance for mercy, when I got clarity on this, I threw my heart open to God. That's the deal of a lifetime. Why would I pass that up? And let me ask you, why would you pass that up? Because the Bible teaches very clearly, we can't get around this, that when it comes time for the price to be paid, there are two options. I mean, you can make the payment on your own, or you can get on the mercy plan. And you can have Jesus, God's Son. Have him be the one who absorbs that penalty, the punishment for that lawlessness. I just want to unapologetically ask you to get on the mercy plan today. Because in the grander scheme of things, mercy starts to change things. See, once you get on the mercy plan, James says, an interesting thing happens. Mercy starts to change you from the inside out. James says, once your heart has been melted by the mercy of God, that law of liberty, that law that gives freedom that he references in this passage, once you've grasped the wonder of your sins being canceled through the sacrifice of Jesus, the seed of mercy goes deep in your heart and begins to change you. It begins to grow in you. It begins to make you into the kind of merciful person God has in mind for you to be. Look again at James 2:12. He says, "Speak and act as those who are going to be judged by the law that gives freedom." He says, mercy is going to change you if it's really gotten into your heart. Once you're judged by the law that gives freedom or liberty, that mercy, it gets deep inside of you. And so instead of keeping score in personal relationships, instead of holding people by their throats, instead of judging and condemning people for their choices and their actions, we begin to extend the same kind of mercy to other people that God has extended to us. That's the so what for those of us who are already on the mercy plan, and I know many of us are. One of the greatest indications that we've authentically embraced this beautiful mercy of Jesus is that we are actually willing to extend it to other people, even when they wrong us. That's James' challenge to those who are on the mercy plan, who know what God has done for them. We speak and act as people who have been shown mercy, and we show that mercy to others. As James says at the end of Verse 13, that last phrase, beautiful. Mercy triumphs over judgment. Mercy triumphs over judgment. Because you know how judgment feels. You know harsh, cold, exacting judgment. Whatever arena you're in, whatever system you're in. Friends, that judgment, it kills the soul. If you're in a harsh, cold, judging marriage, if you grow up in a harsh, cold, judging family, if you worship in a harsh, cold, judging church, it just kills the soul. But flip that around. You bring mercy into the equation. The mercy that comes from the heart of God, you bring mercy into your marriage. So you got a mercy-filled marriage now? Well, there you'll find there's grace to begin to heal and deal with the problems that unavoidably come up. You grow kids in a mercy-filled family. You worship and work and serve and pray in a mercy-filled kind of church. Well, the hearts start to grow. People begin to flourish. Souls begin to find healing. That environment, that atmosphere is so sweet. It's where life comes from, friends. It's the plan of God that mercy would triumph over judgment in every facet of life. Everywhere in the world, in every circle you're in every circle I'm in. But it begins when my life is melted by the mercy of God. And I live in that mercy. And I take that mercy with me, that heart, wherever I go. It begins when your heart is melted by mercy, and you take that heart of mercy wherever you go. But friends, it's a decision. Which plan are you on? Can we make a decision today that we're going to be on the solution side of mercy? Because mercy always will triumph over judgment. And thank God that it does. In fact, let's thank him for that right now. Let's pray together. Oh God, I am so thankful. First, for your holiness. That unlike simple things like food and other things, there's no impurity in you. There's no little bit that sneaks through. You are holy, the Bible says, and we honor and revere you for it. Because at the same time, the truth about us is not so much. The truth is there's impurities in so many parts of my heart, so many parts of my story. And I am so grateful, Lord, that you offer mercy. That my life doesn't have to be filled with the worry and anxiety of where do I stand, what will happen, how do I know, the fear of what may come, but to instead be able to sink into that glorious pool of mercy, to be washed clean, to be made new. New hope, confidence, peace. Lord, I pray for those in this room right now who need to get on the mercy plan. And I ask that even right now, maybe some would acknowledge, trying to be good enough, this game, this scorecard, I'm not getting there. I don't know where the balance point is, God. And so I'll look to you, and I'll take this risk, and I'll ask for mercy. I admit I need it, and I believe you give it. So give me mercy, Lord. Teach me now to live a mercy-filled life, both in how I respond to you and in how I respond to others. And for those of us who've embraced that mercy, friends, we have this great opportunity to take that mercy everywhere we go, show it in every imaginable way in every moment of our lives. But Lord, to do that, we need your help, and we need your Spirit. We need reminded of that reckless love that overwhelms, that pursues, that heals, that forgives, that ultimately transforms. Lord, overwhelm us, I pray, with that reckless love. In the name of the only one who ever really was good, Jesus, through whom we have hope, I pray. Amen.